The big three may have to come up with some ways to get more customers on dealership lots because sales were down again in July and inventories are building up.
What if car dealerships as you know them were about to disappear forever? The pandemic years left buyers furious. Dealers cashed in, marking up cars so high it felt like extortion. That rage turned into regulation. Now, transparency rules are dismantling the very business model that made those markups possible. And dealers, they're drowning. But which brands will survive in this new cutthroat market? Who's already plotting to cut out dealerships entirely? And when the dust settles, what does it mean for your next car and its price tag? Because by the end, you'll see, consumers didn't just fight back. They changed the game forever. The rule that lit the fuse. This wasn't regulation, it was an earthquake. When the Federal Trade Commission finalized its Combating Auto Retail Scams rule in the summer of 2024, most people outside the industry barely noticed. It looked, on paper, like a simple consumer protection measure. In reality, it blew apart the hidden machinery that American car dealerships had relied on for decades. Overnight, the way cars were sold in the United States changed forever. The rule demanded transparency in three devastating ways. First, dealers had to advertise a real offering price, one that included every mandatory fee and charge. For the first time, the number a customer saw online had to be the same number they saw in the finance office. Gone were the days when dealerships lured buyers with one figure, only to spring thousands in extra charges at signing. Second, the rule banned junk fees. Phantom services like VN etching, nitrogen tire fills, and paint protection packages that were never applied could no longer be slipped into contracts as pure profit. Third, the rule required explicit consumer consent for every optional add-on. Extended warranties, maintenance packages, and service contracts could not be quietly embedded in the paperwork anymore. What sounded like common sense to consumers was a wrecking ball to many dealerships. Their front-end gross profits, the money made directly from selling a car, collapsed in weeks. The hidden streams of cash that had once kept the lights on were gone. Industry analysts described it as an uninvited flashlight flooding every dark corner of the showroom. For businesses that had built themselves on murk and manipulation, the effect was immediate and devastating. But the chaos did not stop with one federal rule, because when the courts briefly pulled it back, another force stormed in. Courts pull back, but states attack. At first, dealers thought they had won a reprieve. In late 2024, the Fifth Circuit Court temporarily vacated the Federal Trade Commission's rule, and trade associations celebrated. They believed they had bought themselves time, maybe even a full legal escape. But the victory was short-lived. The genie was already out of the bottle, and state attorneys general across the nation saw their opening. Instead of relief, dealers found themselves under siege from 50 directions at once. State officials began applying their own consumer protection laws to crack down on the very same practices the federal rule had targeted. Rhode Island extracted a $1 million settlement from a dealer group accused of hidden fees. Arizona followed with a $2.5 million consumer restitution case. Illinois went nuclear with a $20 million settlement that sent shockwaves through the industry. These were not random cases. They were deliberate, coordinated, and politically popular. For consumers, the crackdown felt like long overdue justice. Social media swarmed with stories of people who had been gouged during the pandemic years, forced to pay outrageous premiums for basic transportation. For state prosecutors with ambitions for higher office, hammering dealers was a win-win. They looked tough on corporate abuse while responding directly to voter outrage. For dealers, though, it was whack-a-mole with a sledgehammer. Each state had its own laws, its own timelines, its own demands. What once looked like a single battle in federal court had multiplied into an endless war on 50 fronts. The legal onslaught might have seemed survivable if not for the toxic foundation already in place, the shattered trust created during the pandemic markup frenzy. And soon, the anger moved from politics to pavement, visible in the strangest of places. On the very lots where once prized vehicles now sat gathering dust. Before we dig deeper into which brands will survive this storm, make sure you hit that subscribe button so you don't miss the breakdown of the winners, the losers, and how this could change the price of your next car. Showrooms turn into graveyards. Drive past certain dealerships in the Midwest or the South, and you will see a haunting sight. Rows of brand new cars sit untouched, gleaming in the sunlight but unmoved for months. Tires develop flat spots. Dashboards gather a thin film of dust, and seasonal leaves wedge themselves into wipers. These are not display models. They are unsold vehicles, stranded in inventory purgatory. Some have been sitting for over 400 days. A sedan that arrived in early spring remains in the same place come winter. Trucks delivered during cold months now bake through 2 summers without an owner. The paralysis is not evenly spread. Dealers with brands like Toyota, Honda, and Hyundai move vehicles almost as fast as they arrive. Customers trust them, and their lots buzz with activity. But other dealerships, especially those tied to struggling American brands or fading luxury models, have turned into storage yards. A once hyped luxury electric car now sits ignored, its innovations already overshadowed by competitors. Customers see the price, see the history of gouging, and simply walk away. For dealers, each unsold car is more than an eyesore. It is a financial time bomb. Every day that passes adds to floor plan financing costs. The vehicles that once symbolized prosperity now symbolize decay. Communities notice, shoppers notice, even employees notice their commissions shrinking as inventory stagnates. A dealership lot frozen in time is not just a bad quarter, it is a visible sign of collapse, and the frozen lots were only the beginning. What came next would expose the financial bleeding underneath the asphalt, dragging the industry into an even deeper spiral. Winners and losers by brand. The new era of transparency did not strike every dealership equally. Some brands thrived almost immediately, while others suffocated under the weight of public resentment. Walk into a Toyota showroom today, and you'll find vehicles being pre-sold before they even hit the lot. Honda stores move cars so quickly that transport trucks hardly have time to unload. Hyundai, once an underdog, has built such trust in fair pricing that customers now line up, confident they won't be fleeced. These brands built reputations for giving people what they expected at a fair price, and in the transparency era, that reputation is pure gold. Contrast that with luxury European showrooms or struggling American nameplates. Cars sit unmoved for months, no matter how desperate the pitch. A once hyped electric sedan that carried prestige when it launched now languishes unsold, its technology overshadowed, and its price hopelessly out of touch. The same consumers who once tolerated mystery fees or prestige markups are now armed with clear numbers and unforgiving memories. They can see the gap between price and value, and many simply walk away. This divide has already begun reshaping the market. Thriving brands are expanding their networks, while weaker ones face quiet consolidation or outright closures. Transparency is no longer an abstract principle. It has become the dividing line between growth and extinction. But brand reputation was only the first filter. Beneath the surface, a more merciless financial trap was snapping shut, one that turned every unsold car into a bleeding wound on a dealer's balance sheet. The floor plan debt bomb. Dealers do not buy their cars outright with cash. They finance them through a system known as floor plan lending. Each car on the lot accrues interest until it is sold. In good times, when inventory moves quickly, those carrying costs are manageable. In bad times, when cars sit for months, those same costs metastasize into catastrophe. Imagine a $50,000 vehicle that costs roughly $28 a day in interest. Multiply that by hundreds of units, each gathering dust for more than a year, and suddenly a dealership is bleeding well over $1 million annually just to hold unsold metal. That is not a rounding error. That is the difference between survival and bankruptcy. Dealers caught in this trap scramble to keep up with payments. Vendors wait longer to be paid. Payroll becomes a heavier burden. Marketing budgets are slashed at the very moment promotion is most needed. Even facilities show signs of stress as investments are delayed. It is a vicious spiral. The longer inventory sits, the heavier the debt, and the weaker the business becomes. Customers notice the desperation and recoil, worsening the problem. What began as a regulatory adjustment has now become a financial chokehold. And in that chokehold, the psychology of the showroom flips entirely, from dealers dictating terms to dealers begging for relief. That desperation soon erupted in the most dramatic shift of all, the collapse of the markup era into an age of fire sales. From gouging to fire sales, only 2 years ago, managers could force buyers to swallow markups of $10,000 or even $20,000 above sticker price. Today, those same managers are offering discounts so deep they would have been unthinkable in the boom years. Vehicles once priced far above market now sell at $15,000 to $20,000 below the manufacturer's suggested price. Desperate dealers pair those markdowns with 0% financing, extended loan terms, and inflated trade-in allowances, anything to move cars off the lot. Inside showrooms, the change is stark. Gone are the hours-long negotiations where customers were shuffled between salespeople and finance officers. Now, sales managers rush to volunteer their best number, terrified the customer will check prices elsewhere and walk away. Some dealers even resort to wholesale auctions, dumping cars at steep losses simply to generate cash flow and relieve floor plan pressure. For consumers, the bargains are intoxicating. For the industry, the bargains are poison. Each sale at a loss digs the hole deeper. The race to liquidate inventory is a mirror image of the pandemic gouging frenzy. Where once the consumer had no leverage, now the dealer has none. And as margins collapse and desperation spreads, an even more dangerous threat emerges, not from consumers, but from the very structure that once protected dealerships from competition. The franchise shield cracks. For nearly a century, state franchise laws guaranteed dealerships a kind of legal armor. Automakers were forced to sell through them, consumers were forced to buy from them, and the entire system operated as a protected monopoly. It was inefficient, yes, but it was safe. That safety is now crumbling. The transparency rules shattered one of the core justifications for franchise protection. When every buyer can instantly compare prices across states, the argument for territorial exclusivity evaporates. More importantly, manufacturers have seized on the crisis to tighten their grip. Some are already experimenting with new models of distribution: agency sales, digital-first platforms, or electric vehicle agreements that grant them greater control. Others are quietly threatening underperforming stores with reduced inventory allocations, a death sentence in a weak market. For dealers who once thought themselves untouchable, this is existential. They invested millions in facilities and staff on the assumption that franchise laws would shield them from direct competition. Now those shields are buckling. Manufacturers see a chance to reshape the landscape, cutting weaker partners loose and reclaiming more of the customer relationship. What was once a stable fortress has begun to crack under the weight of transparency and financial desperation. And through those cracks, a new vision of automotive retail is already pressing forward. One pioneered not by Detroit or Stuttgart, but by a disruptive player that had long been dismissed as an anomaly. Tesla's ghost haunts the industry. Tesla was once dismissed as an eccentric outlier in the car business. Its refusal to use franchise dealers looked reckless, almost suicidal. How could a company survive without the local networks that had dominated auto sales for nearly a century? But as today's dealerships bleed from unsold inventory, Tesla's direct-to-consumer model no longer looks like a quirk. It looks like the blueprint. Tesla controls every part of its sales cycle. No dealer floor plan debt. No middlemen inflating prices with mystery fees. When consumer demand shifts, Tesla can cut or raise prices nationwide with a single decision. It can scale production up or down without waiting for local managers to catch up. This flexibility allowed it to dodge the inventory paralysis strangling conventional dealers. Even more crucial, Tesla owns the customer relationship. Buyers know exactly what they'll pay before they ever click purchase. There is no theater of negotiation, no hidden add-ons slipped in at signing. That consistency has built a trust that traditional dealers, battered by decades of complaints and pandemic markups, can no longer claim. Legacy automakers once sneered at Tesla's model as unrealistic. Now, as their dealers drown in debt, they study it with envy. If Tesla can sell directly without collapsing, why can't they? That question is no longer rhetorical, it is turning into corporate strategy. And while Tesla's ghost looms over the industry, its influence has already sparked quiet but dramatic re-engineering inside the very halls of Detroit. Legacy automakers quietly retool. Ford, General Motors, Volkswagen, and Stellantis are no longer pretending this crisis is temporary. Behind closed doors, they are rewriting the rules of engagement. Ford has demanded that its electric vehicle dealers sign new contracts that strip them of many traditional powers, giving the manufacturer tighter control over pricing and standards. General Motors has launched digital-first platforms that handle large parts of the transaction online, before a buyer ever steps onto a showroom floor. Volkswagen is experimenting in Europe with the agency model, where dealers act less like independent businesses and more like delivery points for factory sales. These moves were once seen as experimental. Now they are accelerating, camouflaged by the chaos engulfing dealers. Consumers, burned by hidden fees and gouging during the pandemic, have little sympathy. Politicians eager to score points on transparency are unlikely to object, and manufacturers are seizing the moment, calculating that they can shrink their dealer networks by 30 or even 40% within the next 3 years. Without sparking the backlash such moves would have drawn a decade ago. Dealers who spent millions upgrading facilities under the old promises of exclusivity now feel the ground shifting beneath their feet. Automakers no longer whisper about restructuring. They are writing it into policy. The franchise shield is weakening, and once sacred contracts are being bent, stretched, and in some cases ignored. While manufacturers quietly chart their new course, the storm already rages on Main Street, where dealerships serve as far more than just places to buy cars. Main Street feels the blow. When a dealership closes in a small town, it is not just another business failure. It is a community earthquake. A mid-sized store may directly employ 50 to 100 people, but economists note that each of those jobs supports more than 3 additional roles in the surrounding economy. That means the loss of one dealership can erase as many as 250 jobs when the ripple effect reaches suppliers, restaurants, advertising agencies, and service providers. The blow does not stop at payroll. Dealerships often act as civic anchors. They sponsor Little League teams, fund scholarships, donate to local hospitals, and serve on city councils or school boards. When those owners vanish, so too does a vital thread in the fabric of civic life. In many towns, the dealership was not just a business. It was the largest local donor, employer, and meeting point rolled into one. For families, the fallout is intimate. Workers who have spent decades in service bays or sales floors suddenly find their skills stranded. Specialized training in manufacturer systems or warranty processes does not easily translate into new careers. Stress fractures households, and mental health struggles rise as stability disappears. Unlike factories, which cluster regionally, dealership closures scatter unpredictably. Urban and rural communities alike feel the sting, often with no safety net to catch them. Even as communities struggle to adapt, the financial institutions that once underpinned the entire system are retreating, tightening credit at the very moment dealers need relief. Banks and lenders pull back. Dealers live and die on credit. Floor plan financing, the loans that allow them to stock cars on their lots, was once seen as stable, low-risk lending. But now, with cars sitting unsold for more than 400 days, banks see collateral turning into liabilities. Vehicles depreciate every day they remain idle, and lenders know it. The response has been swift. Higher interest rates for vulnerable dealers, stricter conditions on loans, and in some cases, an outright refusal to extend credit. For dealers already drowning in floor plan costs, this tightening feels like a noose. Without affordable financing, even those who might scrape through the downturn find themselves collapsing under the weight of payments. Payroll gets delayed, vendors wait months for checks, tax bills pile up. What could have been a slow bleed turns into a sudden cardiac arrest. The shock travels up the chain. Manufacturers depend on dealers to absorb inventory. If dealers cannot take new shipments, automakers are stuck with cars they cannot move. That chokes cash flow at the very moment Detroit and its rivals are pouring billions into electrification. Suppliers, logistics companies, and regional economies all feel the tremors. Meanwhile, Wall Street smells blood. Private equity firms and hedge funds see distressed dealerships not as tragedies, but as bargains. They are already circling, looking to buy up struggling stores at pennies on the dollar, consolidating them into leaner, more centralized networks. For lenders, it is risk management. For investors, it is opportunity. For communities, it is devastation. What began as a transparency rule has spiraled outward, hollowing main streets, spooking banks, and enticing financiers. But even this cascading crisis may be overshadowed by what comes next. The political and social war over whether the dealership model should survive at all. Politics in overdrive. The dealership collapse is no longer just an economic story. It has become a political battlefield. the sight of silent lots filled with unsold cars has become a weapon in speeches from both parties. Industry lobbyists warn of tens of thousands of job losses, portraying dealers as small businesses crushed by regulatory overreach. Consumer advocates, meanwhile, point to the same empty showrooms as proof that the old model was rotten and exploitative from the start. State attorneys general, emboldened by public anger, are using the crisis to launch aggressive enforcement actions. Settlements have already stripped millions of dollars from dealers accused of hidden fees and deceptive markups. Politicians see these prosecutions as politically safe. There are no sympathetic headlines for car dealers who once charged families $20,000 above sticker. The real fracture runs across party lines. Rural representatives, usually defenders of business interests, are torn between protecting local dealers and appeasing voters still seething over pandemic price gouging. Urban lawmakers, often champions of consumer protection, are now pressed to consider the job losses in their own districts. Labor unions representing dealership workers add another layer of tension, pushing for retraining programs and transition funding. Every election cycle magnifies the stakes. Candidates cast themselves as either defenders of small-town enterprise or champions of consumer fairness. The fight is no longer about cars. It is about identity, trust, and survival. And as Washington drowns in competing narratives, another tide rises that reshapes not just dealerships, but the expectations of every American consumer. America's transparency tide. What is happening to dealerships is part of a much larger cultural shift. Across every industry, Americans are demanding transparency. Real estate agents face online platforms that give buyers direct access to listings. Retail giants compete with manufacturers selling directly through their own websites. Healthcare providers contend with patients who arrive armed with price comparisons and treatment reviews. The dealership meltdown is simply the most visible case study. For decades, car buying was built on information asymmetry. Dealers held all the knowledge about costs, margins, and inventory. Consumers walked into showrooms blind, forced to negotiate in the dark. The new rules flipped that dynamic overnight. Buyers now see actual costs, compare offers across states, and demand documented consent for every add-on. The negotiation theater has collapsed, and with it, the foundation of dealership profitability. This transparency tide is not going back. Even if some state laws soften or federal regulations shift, consumer expectations have permanently changed. People no longer accept opacity as normal. They see it as predatory. Industries that resist, whether in cars, housing, or healthcare, risk not just losing customers, but inviting regulators to intervene. The tide has washed over the auto industry first, but it will not stop here. And as consumers grow more powerful, Wall Street has already begun plotting how to seize the chaos and turn it into profit. Wall Street smells opportunity. Where Main Street sees devastation, Wall Street sees bargains. Private equity firms and mega dealer groups are quietly hunting distressed assets, looking to scoop up struggling franchises at pennies on the dollar. The math is simple. Acquire dealerships with valuable land and service operations, strip out costs, and consolidate them into larger networks that thrive in the transparency era. This wave of consolidation is accelerating. Merger activity among mid-sized dealer groups has surged, driven by the need to spread costs across wider networks, invest in digital platforms, and secure leverage with manufacturers. The fragmented patchwork of thousands of local dealers is giving way to a smaller map, dominated by a few powerful chains. For investors, this is disruption as opportunity. For communities, it means fewer independent owners, less local philanthropy, and more decisions made in distant boardrooms. Some manufacturers quietly welcome this shift. They prefer to work with fewer, stronger partners who can absorb the cost of compliance and modernization. But this financial engineering raises a deeper question. If dealerships become giant corporate chains owned by Wall Street, are they still dealerships in the traditional sense? Or have they morphed into something closer to retail distribution hubs? Efficient, consolidated, but stripped of the local character that once defined them. The answer matters because it sets the stage for the final transformation. The endgame where manufacturers themselves may step in and erase the middleman entirely. The consumer crossroads. For the American buyer, the dealership crisis is both a blessing and a warning. In the short term, deals have never been better. Cars that once sold for $10,000 above sticker are now marked down by $15,000 or even $20,000. Financing incentives, generous trade-in allowances, and desperate sales managers create an environment where strategic buyers can save fortunes. But those bargains hide longer-term risks. As dealerships close or consolidate, service access shrinks. Warranty repairs may require long drives or long waits. Used car values may plummet as the market floods with discounted vehicles, leaving today's buyers saddled with negative equity tomorrow. And as manufacturers tighten control or shift to direct sales, the local leverage of walking into a dealership to negotiate may vanish entirely. Consumers stand at a crossroads. They can enjoy the unprecedented power created by transparency, but they must also prepare for a future where fewer choices and less personal service define the market. The dealership as Americans knew it, loud, messy, and local, is fading into history. In its place rises something leaner, colder, and more controlled. What began as a single consumer protection rule has unleashed a transformation that no one, not even the regulators, fully foresaw. It is not just about cars, it is about the future of American commerce itself. So, what do you think? Will dealerships survive this? Or are they finished for good? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. And if you found this breakdown useful, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. It really helps the channel grow, and I've got even bigger stories on the future of cars coming your way.